Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 266, Furness versus Furness. Acknowledgement and thanks again to Melanie Mito, who has a website called thebigamyproject.com. I'll place a link on my notes and on my Facebook post. I gained permission to use her blog as a basis for this episode. Mrs. Thompson, a mother of 5 daughters and a son, accused her newly acquired son-in-law of having married her 15-year-old daughter without her consent. The Melbourne Herald reported on the same day the mother informed the police that this was a serious charge. So who was her daughter and who was a newly acquired son-in-law, and how did this occur without her consent? Mrs. Thompson's daughter was Jessie, who was born at sea on the HMS Buckinghamshire en route from London to Port Chalmers in Dunedin, New Zealand on the 18th of May 1874. The new son-in-law was William Henry Strickland Furness, a 23-year-old dairyman from Coburg, Tasmania. William was born in March 1865, so was 9 years older than Jessie. He was born in Carnforth, Lancashire, England. Reverend Nathaniel Kinsman met with William Furness at his Collingwood parlour on the 11th of February 1890. William Furness had seemingly heard about the Reverend's quick and easy marriage business and sought to bring Jessie Thompson before the pulpit. William inquired on the availability and prices, and the Reverend turned Furness away because the bride-to-be was 16 years old. Jessie was actually only 15. Nathaniel Kinsman made an extensive career of performing cheap and easy marriages, and he drew a heavy degree of criticism. Of the 10,000 or so couples that he joined, a Perth Catholic weekly newspaper claimed that 50% of the divorces applied for in Australia had a ceremony performed by Reverend N. Kinsman in their evidence. No fewer than 19 bigamy cases in Victoria involved the Free Church of England minister Kinsman, and he was implicated in 115 divorce cases. The Victorian marriage laws were clear. A marriage could only take place once consent from the minor's parents was obtained. So thinking quickly on his feet, Furness informed the Reverend that he left at home a letter from the bride's mother in which she consented to the marriage. Kinsman waited the customary 3 days required by law for registrars, not for ministers, to perform the ceremony. 2 days later, the couple returned with the letter and Kinsman performed the marriage ceremony. It took less than 2 days after the celebration for Jessie's mother to charge the groom with marrying a minor. Jessie did not testify at his trial as she was now the wife of Furness, but no one in court contested the fact that she had forged her mother's signature. On the 24th of February 1890 in the Melbourne Argus, a dairyman named William H.S. Furness, 23 years of age, has been arrested in Launceston, Tasmania on a warrant and was lodged in the City Watch House on Saturday. It's alleged that he unlawfully married a young girl, Jessie Thompson, 15 years of age, without the consent of Elizabeth Thompson, her mother, who was a widow. Jessie Thompson resided with her mother in Mary Street, Coburg. A document purporting to be the written consent of Mrs. Thompson to the marriage was submitted to the clergyman, but Mrs. Thompson denies that the signature is hers. Constable Adams executed the warrant, and the accused will be charged with the offence at the City Court today. And on the 4th of March 1890 in the Melbourne Argus, charge of illegally marrying a minor. At the Fitzroy Court yesterday, a young man named William H.S. Furness was charged with marrying a minor. The accused was undefended. Mr. Gillett prosecuted and said that the accused was charged under the 23rd section of the Marriage and Matrimonial Causes Statute with marrying one Jessie Thompson, knowing her to be a minor. The accused, being unable to induce the mother of the girl to give consent to the marriage, had caused the girl to write a letter at his dictation which purported to be her mother's consent to the marriage. This forged letter was only written a few minutes before the marriage ceremony was performed. He could not help expressing his surprise that Mr. Kinsman, who solemnised the marriage in question, had not taken greater pains to ascertain the genuineness of the document. Elizabeth Thompson deposed that she was a widow. Her husband Alfred died a few years after sailing from London to Dunedin, leaving her alone to take care of their 2 younger daughters. 3 of her adult children stayed in New Zealand, and she relocated to Melbourne with her two youngest daughters and to be closer to her eldest daughter Catherine, who was running a successful hotel in Melbourne with her husband Christopher Lawrence. And she'd known Furness for about 18 months. He'd several times asked her to allow him to pay addresses to her daughter, but she refused to do so. She proudly testified to have told the young man, "I would as soon she is dead than let you have her." She admitted that she assaulted him. "I struck him with a piece of wood over his head and shoulders and told him to go away, and he did so." Mrs. Thompson established that Furness knew very well her objection, and she demonstrated that she would not hesitate to protect her daughter from the young man. The prisoner also told her Mrs. Catherine Lawrence, the girl's sister, that he intended to marry her, and she said he was mad as the girl was only 15. The Melbourne Age reported that though violently discouraged by the mother, who abused Furness and according to her own statement threw-wooded him, the couple become clandestinely engaged. And at 9:30 at night on the 13th of February last, her daughter told her that she'd had that evening been married to Furness by Mr. N. Kinsman of Fitzroy. Mrs. Thompson vented, "You are a rogue, a vagabond and a thief for taking my child." In his defence, Furness asserted that it was because you came between us. The witness did not write the letter purporting to give her consent. It was the handwriting of her daughter. On the day of the marriage, Jessie was staying with her eldest sister. Her sister, Catherine Lawrence, testified that at 10 a.m. on the 13th of February, her sister had gone to visit a friend. Catherine insinuated that her young sister deceived her, not letting her know she'd gone to meet with Furness. Catherine confirmed that Furness was infatuated with her little sister, talking a lot about Jessie to her, giving consent to her daughter's marriage. Nathaniel Kinsman deposed that he was a minister of the Free Church of England, and 3 or 4 days prior to the 13th of February, the accused called upon him to arrange the details of a marriage. Furness stated that the young lady he was going to marry was 16 years old, that her mother resided in Launceston, Tasmania, and the witness told him he would have to get the consent of the mother. The prisoner replied, "Oh, I have the written instructions of the mother in a letter." Mr. Kinsman said, "I must have that letter," and he said, "I will bring it." On the 13th of February, the prisoner came about half an hour before the marriage was celebrated, and he brought the letter which purported to be the consent of the mother to her marriage. The accused, accompanied by Jessie Thompson and Mr. and Mrs. Olsen, went to his residence at 8:30 on the evening of the 18th of February, and he married them. The letter was given to him by the accused before he performed the ceremony. He did not ask to be shown the envelope that contained it. It might have been prudent to have done so. Agnes Olsen deposed that on the evening of the 13th of February she went with her husband, the accused, and Jessie Thompson to a hotel in Smith Street. Whilst in the hotel, Jessie Thompson wrote the letter purporting to be her mother's consent to her marriage. After the letter was written, they all went to Mr. Kinsman and the marriage took place. This letter was as follows. 6th of January 1890, Launceston. Dear Furness, I received your kind letter but was rather surprised at what you had to ask. I give my consent provided you can make her happy and comfortable. When you are married, you must bring her over and see me and spend a month or two. Hoping you are enjoying the best of health, don't forget to come as soon as possible. I must now close. With love to Jessie, yours truly, Elizabeth Thompson. Constable Adams deposed that the accused was arrested in Launceston on the 17th of February by Detective Brannan of the Tasmanian Police. George Adams travelled to Tasmania to fetch the groom and escort him back to Melbourne to face charges, testified that when he arrested Furness, the accused said, "I will do 10 years for her. I will have her by fair means or foul." The officer further declared that Furness admitted that Jessie wrote the consent letter, but in a gentleman's fashion he was ready to be held responsible. "I was the cause of her writing the letter and I will take all the blame." He may have vanished to Tasmania after the altercation with his mother-in-law, but he was still hoping to have a life with Jessie. Some papers supported the accused publishing the love letters he sent to his teen bride. The first one, written before he left Tasmania, bears his eagerness and undying love. Dear loved one, I now write these few lines to you again to say that I have got to leave without seeing you. Dear Jessie, try and cheer up for my sake. Don't be afraid of them. Tell them that I will spend half my life in jail for you. Then you will be my lawful wife, after all they can do to me. If it costs me my life, my sweetest, they shan't hurt you, my love, my life, my future happiness, my heaven. I sail today, you know where to. I will keep my promise until death in everything. This is all. Your loving husband, W. Furness, for life. P.S. They can never part us two this side of the grave. Trying to establish the accused's guilt, Constable Adams asked Furness if he'd paid the Olsen couple to witness the marriage, to which the groom simply replied that he gave Agnes Olsen's husband £1 after the marriage to get a drink. The prisoner was committed for trial. While sitting in his Melbourne cell awaiting trial, he sent another missive to his bride, revealing that he expected her to reciprocate his feelings. Dear Jessie, I now sit down to write a few lines to you, hoping they will find you in good health, as it leaves me at present. Dear Jessie, I am surprised at not getting a few lines from you, but never mind, it can't be helped. Dear Jessie, I suppose your mother and all the rest of them is all right now, that they have got me in jail, but it is not for a murder, nor being a thief, thank God. Dear Jessie, when your mother has done her worst to me, I shall never blame her, nor Mrs. Lawrence for doing of it, only myself. Dear Jessie, you need not be afraid, for I will stand all the blame. If you will write to me as soon as you can, Jessie, for I am waiting for a few lines from you. If you can't write, come up and see me on Friday. So this is all this time, so I conclude by still remaining yours forever, W. Furness. And in the Melbourne Argus on the 18th of March 1890, Mr. Justice Williams was severe yesterday in regards to the easy method of performing a marriage ceremony practised by Mr. Nathaniel Kinsman. Mr. Kinsman prides himself on the number of marriages he celebrated. He seems to regard both as his chief ambition and his easiest means of livelihood, and when a couple presents themselves to be joined in the bonds of matrimony, he puts in their way as few difficulties as possible. To see the effects of this system, we need only to turn to an illustrative case, a report of which appears this morning. The Crown Prosecutor asked the witness the following questions, to which Mr. Kinsman replied. The Crown Prosecutor asked, "Where is Launceston?" "It is a place near at hand." "But where is it?" "Launceston is Launceston." "Do you swear as a minister of religion that you don't know where Launceston is?" And Mr. Kinsman said, "It is in Victoria." "Where is it?" He said, "I'm ignorant of the place. I was never there. I believe it is over the water." Then Mr. Justice Williams said, "If you don't know where Launceston is, you must be a most uneducated and ignorant man." Mr. Kinsman responded, "The prisoner handed me the document. I believed it was genuine. It looked old and was crumpled. I did not inquire where Launceston was. I did not know where the girl's mother was. She might have been next door for all I knew or cared." The Crown Prosecutor said, "And you did not ask where Launceston was?" And Mr. Kinsman said, "No, I thought it was near one of the islands. The prisoner went away and came back in half an hour with the girl and the witness, and I married the prisoner and the girl in the presence of 2 witnesses who came from Coburg. I've heard of America, but I don't know it, as I was never there. I've heard of Scotland. I know where it is, although I have not been there. I believe Launceston is a short distance from Melbourne. It's further than Williamstown and further than Geelong. I believe it is outside Queenscliff." Mr. Kelleher said, "You have married a great many people." And he said, "Yes, and some of them are very glad to get married. I've married over 7,000 couples. And Mr. Kelleher said, "You seem to be very proud of it." He said, "Yes, I am." "What are you paid?" "Sometimes I marry free, but my regular charge is 30 shillings. I get enough to make a living, and a very good living too. I am very particular in celebrating marriages. I was particular in this case. The prisoner said he had a letter from the girl's mother, and he went away to get it. I'm in the habit of relying on such consents. When the father is dead and the mother is alive, a marriage on her consent is sometimes welcome. Out of the 7,000 marriages I have performed, I've not had 12 inquired into by the courts. All of the marriages have been legally and properly done. They are unquestionable and lawful." Mr. Justice Williams, in addressing the jury, said that there were some extenuating circumstances as far as the prisoner was concerned. He appeared to have been at one time encouraged by the girl's mother, whose only objection was to her daughter's age. Then the prisoner, after the marriage, brought the girl back to her mother and went himself away to work for a home. It did seem strange that while a man might seduce and ruin a young girl for life, and the law provided no punishment, yet if he married her without her parents' or guardians' consent, he was liable to severe punishment. However, that was the law. Mr. Kinsman knew she was only 15 years old and made no inquiries. He was content with a piece of paper produced to him purported to be signed by the mother. This man made no inquiries. Mr. Justice Williams trusted that the guardians of the criminal law of the country would, if they could see their way to do so, take such steps as would prevent him celebrating marriages in the future. He trusted the Attorney-General would see his way to take steps to prevent Mr. Nathaniel Kinsman from not taking ordinary precautions.
He should have asked where the girl's mother lived and written to her, and if satisfied with her answer, then he might have celebrated the marriage. But he did nothing of the kind. He got what purported to be consent and then said, "I'll marry you in half an hour." So as far as the prisoner was concerned, the jury could recommend him to mercy, and he would be prepared to take such a recommendation into consideration. The jury retired for 3/4 of an hour. Then Mr. Justice Williams brought them into the court and asked them if they had any difficulty, and if they did, he would try to remove it. The foreman said that all the jurors but one agreed. Mr. Justice Williams said the prisoner had himself admitted the offence. He had previously said that there were mitigating circumstances in the case, and he would probably consider any recommendation of the jury. The person who was most to blame was the easygoing registrar of the marriage, who seemed to only care for his fee. The jury then deliberated for a further half an hour and returned into the court with a verdict of guilty, accompanied by a strong recommendation to mercy. The jury added to the verdict a rider of the effect that they trusted that the attention of the authorities might be drawn to the conduct of Mr. Kinsman so as to prevent a repetition of such a case. Mr. Accusedher reminded His Honour that the prisoner has been in jail since the 15th of February. Mr. Justice Williams, in passing sentence, said the offence was conclusively proved. There was no escape from it. The only difficulty was what sentence he ought to pass in order to vindicate the law. That a breach of law had been committed was undoubted, as the prisoner had admitted. He heartily concurred with the recommendation of the jury and should be very glad to give effect to it. He might also say that he agreed with their rider, and he was sure that the effect of that rider would be conveyed to the proper law authorities. It appeared that the prisoner was a respectable young man. He was by no means a loafer, and he'd not only been respectable but industrious up until the time that he committed this breach of law. He was not a member of the criminal class, and nor did he seem to be any way tainted by crime. Therefore, he should be loath to send him to jail even for a single hour. He should be justified in passing a very light sentence and also not sending him to jail. The sentence was that the prisoner be discharged on entering into his own recognizance of £25 and a surety of £10 to come up for sentence when called on. So long as the defendant conducted himself honestly, industriously and peaceably and did not come into collision with the laws of the country, he would never be called up for sentence. But if he misconducted himself and infringed the law, he would be liable to be sentenced to any term of imprisonment from 1 month to 5 years. The matter was entirely in his own hands and would be a strong incentive to him in the future to continue to lead the honest, industrious life which he has appeared to have led before committing this offence. And 6 days later, in the Melbourne Argus on the 24th of March 1890, the Crown Law authorities have decided on the action to be taken against Reverend N. Kinsman of Fitzroy with regard to his conduct in marrying a minor without the consent of her parents. It has now been decided to proceed against Mr. Kinsman for his breach of the law, and a summons will be issued immediately calling on him to answer the charge at an early date at the Fitzroy Police Court. A day before he was to testify in Kinsman's trial, charged with marrying a minor, Furness was arrested on a warrant taken by his wife, who feared for her life. In less than a month after their marriage, their love story had turned sour. She'd informed authorities that her husband had threatened her life in reaction to her rejection. Jessie's brother-in-law, Christopher Lawrence, corroborated her story when he deposed that he found Furness prowling around his home with a gun and badgered him about the whereabouts of Jessie. And the article says, William Henry Furness appeared on remand at the Coburg Court yesterday, charged with having made use of threatening language towards his wife on the 17th and 20th of March. Jessie Furness, the complainant and the wife of the defendant, said she resided with her brother-in-law, Christopher Lawrence, at the Nugget and Woolpack Motel at Moreland. On the evening of the 17th, the defendant called on her at the hotel and desired to know when she would come and live with him. He made the remark, "If you do not come, I will have something here that will do," and produced a revolver from his pocket. Mrs. Lawrence, her sister, came in, and Furness, drawing his hat over his eyes, walked away. He made an appearance again on the 20th and showed her some document in a large blue envelope, stating it was an order made by Judge Williams for her to go with him. He remarked that he was on his way to the police station for a constable to take her, and at 3 p.m. returned with Constable Daly, who remained outside whilst he came into the bar and said he had called for her. The witness replied that she would call her mother. A friend of the defendant then induced him to leave. He made use of threats on that occasion also. Cross-examined by Mr. Slevright, the complainant said she would not go with her husband as he had no home to take her to. She did not know why she married him. He said he wanted to get married, and she supposed she obliged him. She had been used to a good home all her life and would not go with him into lodgings. The bench decided to dismiss the information. On the 16th of April 1890 in the Melbourne Argus, marrying a minor, Mr. N. Kinsman committed for trial. At the Fitzroy Court yesterday afternoon, Nathaniel Kinsman, described as a pastor of the Free Church of England, was proceeded against at the instance of Detective Sergeant Duncan on a charge of celebrating an unlawful marriage. The first witness called was William H.S. Furness, who deposed he was a mariner and some time ago he purchased a milk round at Coburg. Whilst engaging delivering milk, he became acquainted with Miss Thompson, who resided with her mother at Coburg. He first met her at South Melbourne, and on the 11th of February last he went to the defendant and arranged with him for the marriage of himself and Miss Thompson. He told the defendant the girl was underage and that the father was deceased. He told him that the mother resided in Launceston, Tasmania. The defendant replied to the witness that written consent of the mother would have to be obtained to celebrate the marriage. The defendant took the ages of the witness and his intended wife, and at 8 o'clock in the evening on the day of the marriage, he called upon the defendant and asked him if he was ready to perform the ceremony. The defendant replied in the affirmative. The witness agreed to return in a few minutes with his intended wife and witnesses. The witness, after leaving the defendant at his house, went to an adjoining hotel where his intended wife and witnesses were awaiting his return. His intended wife wrote the written consent produced, purporting to be signed by the mother. The contents were not dictated to her. The witness only said to his intended wife, Jessie, to write the same as if you were writing to me. After the letter was written, they proceeded to the defendant's house. They handed the letter of consent to the defendant as they entered. The defendant did not look at the contents of the letter. The party adjourned to the room upstairs and the defendant solemnised the marriage. Jessie Furness, née Thompson, wife of the last witness, stated that Furness had told her to write the consent of marriage for her mother. She did so, but was not aware that the letter would be given to the defendant, otherwise she would not have done so. Directly after the marriage, she returned to her mother at Coburg. She informed her mother that in fact she was married. On the following day, in company with her elder married sister and brother-in-law and mother, she called upon the defendant. Her brother-in-law demanded to be shown the letter of consent, but the defendant refused, saying he would show it only if he was compelled by law. Mrs. Catherine Lawrence, wife of the licensee of the Woolpack Hotel in Coburg and sister of Mrs. Furness, gave evidence as to the refusal of the defendant to produce the letter of consent. Chris Lawrence, husband of the last witness, stated that he applied to the defendant for the letter, purporting to be the written consent of marriage by the mother of Mrs. Furness, and was refused. Mrs. Thompson deposed that her daughter Jessie would be 16 years of age next month. She never gave her consent to the marriage of her daughter with Furness, and the consent produced was not written by her, and she's never resided in Tasmania. Henry Crone, the Registrar General, said he'd heard numerous complaints about marriages performed by the defendant. After other evidence had been given, Mr. Gillett for the defence contended that the shrewdest commercial men were occasionally imposed upon by forged documents. In the present case, the defendant had reasonable grounds for assuming that the document, purporting to be the written consent of marriage, was genuine. The defendant was committed for trial at the Supreme Court Sessions to be held on the 15th, with bail allowed in a surety of £200 and the defendant in a like amount. And on the 2nd of April 1890 in the Melbourne Argus, new charge against Furness in marrying a minor case. Kinsman, also charged in connection with the case, adjourned because of illness of the witness. Yesterday at the Coburg Court, William Henry Strickland Furness, against whom a charge of marrying a minor was recently dealt with by Judge Williams in the criminal court, was proceeded against on the charge of threatening the life of his wife. Mr. Seavride appeared for the defence and Sergeant Bass conducted the prosecution. The accused appeared on remand from the 28th and Sergeant Bass informed the court that he would again have to apply for a further adjournment owing to the illness of two principal witnesses. Mr. Seavride requested that the accused be allowed out on his own recognisances in the event of a further remand and stated he had every reason to believe that the prosecution had been instigated by the wife's relatives rather than of her own free will. Furness was charged with threatening to do for her with a revolver on the 17th, yet a letter was found on him by the police showing that she entertained the most friendly relations towards him 2 days after the alleged occurrence. Sergeant Bass objected to any bail being allowed owing to the complaints of fear from relatives of the girl. The bench decided to admit Furness to bail in his own recognisance of £25. And in the case for Nathaniel Kinsman, Owing to the unavoidable absence of two material witnesses through illness, Detective Duncan Saul was compelled to ask for a further adjournment of the case for 14 days. Mr. Gillett, who appeared for the defendant, objected to the case being again postponed. The charge was a serious one, and it was unfair to keep it hanging over the head of his client. Detective Duncan stated that Mrs. Lawrence, a witness, had only recently been confined, and Mrs. Furness was suffering from an attack of influenza. He'd seen both ladies on Friday. He had on the previous evening received a telegram from Mrs. Thompson informing him that a medical certificate as to her daughter's illness would follow, and it was quite possible that the certificate was now in the Crown Law offices. Mr. Gillett suggested that Detective Duncan should withdraw the case and recommence when his witnesses were able to attend. After some further discussion, the case was adjourned until the 15th. And in the Gippsland Times of Victoria on the 23rd of June 1890, the Kinsman case. Reverend Nathaniel Kinsman was tried at the Criminal Court on Friday for unlawfully marrying a minor. The jury found that the defendant honestly believed the girl's mother had given her consent to the marriage and on that ground recommended him to mercy. Mr. Kinsman was brought up, and in answer to the usual question, the defendant said his excuse for acting as he had done was that the consent produced to him was sufficient authority to celebrate the marriage. He thought at the time that Launceston was in the province of Victoria, and that the consent of a person there authorised him to celebrate marriages. That was his only point. His Honour, in passing sentence, said, "I do not think that I would be justified in inflicting upon you any imprisonment whatsoever. I think that a fine will amply meet the justice of this case, but I also think it should be a substantial fine." The defendant was then sentenced to a fine of £100, which he paid immediately. Jessie sought a divorce in February 1896. In the Gippsland Times on the 10th of February 1896, a decree nisi was granted by His Honour the Chief Justice last week to Jessie Furness of the Central Hotel Lakes Entrance for a divorce from her husband William Henry Furness. The parties were married in February 1890 by Reverend Kinsman, the petitioner being 15 years of age and the respondent 21. The petitioner said she went straight back to her married sister's house at Moreland after the ceremony. Mr. Kinsman and the husband were prosecuted as the written consent of the bride's parents to the marriage had not been obtained. It was alleged that Furness only saw her once after the marriage and on that occasion threatened to shoot her because she had divulged their marriage. He was a sailor and was last heard of in Tasmania. In answer to the Chief Justice, the petitioner said she really didn't know how she came to marry the respondent, whom she'd known only a short time before the marriage. In her affidavit, Jessie stressed she'd never cohabited with the respondent. She mentioned his conviction for marrying a minor and that she visited him in jail while he was awaiting trial, asking what he was going to do in regards to our future, and he said he didn't know what he was going to do. In her next point, Jessie claimed that on the 17th of March 1890, the defendant came to see me at my place of residence in Moreland and upbraided me for telling my relations of the said marriage and finally took out a revolver and said he would shoot me. A decree nisi was granted. So what happened to William Furness? A family researcher that had a connection with William Furness said that her grandfather, Philip Foley, lived with her family when she was a young girl, and he was a good friend with William when they were young boys in Barrow in Furness in England. He was known as Willie. One day they were at the docks in Barrow and they hid on a ship, not knowing where it was going. Her grandfather was found and put ashore in Liverpool and he had to find his way back to Barrow. Willie later wrote home and said that he had landed. However, there was no further details. Her grandfather actually married Willie's sister, Sarah Ann Furness. William Furness married Evangeline Carpenter in December 1894, before Jessie had officially divorced him, making him a bigamist. William was recorded as being a mariner living in Melbourne in 1890. He then returned to Tasmania where he became a lighthouse keeper at Wickham on King Island in 1919 with his new wife Evangeline, and then in Georgetown in 1928. In 1936 and 1937 they were living at Kingston Beach in Tasmania and he was a master mariner. William died on the 17th of June 1943 at the General Hospital in Launceston. Said he was the dearly beloved husband of Evangeline Furness of Launceston and brother-in-law of Mr. J.H. Farmer of Hobart, and he was 80 and he was late superintendent of lighthouses. They had no children. After Jessie received her decree nisi in May 1896 on the grounds of desertion, she reverted to her maiden name and in 1898 married George Washington Rochford. George Rochford had been born in July 1869 in North Melbourne and was 5 years older than Jessie. His parents were George Rochford, an Irish civil servant, and Lucy Taylor, née King, who was born in England. Together they raised 7 sons. George was a bike racer, and there is a photo of him on his penny farthing bicycle in 1890 in Creswick, Victoria, with Jack Flanagan, his trainer. In February 1901, they were living at Genoa River in Victoria. There was a notice of application for a transfer of licence, stating, "I, the undersigned George Washington Rochford, being the holder of a roadside victualler's licence for the house and premises known as Miramingo Hotels, situated at Genoa River, give notice that I intend to apply to the licensing court for the licensing district of Snowy River to be held at Orbost on the 11th of February 1901 to transfer the licence to Henry Alexander Allen of Genoa River." They lived in Eden, New South Wales in 1901, and on the 9th of November 1904 there was an application for a transfer of licence in the licensing court of Eltham, Victoria. Ellen Veronica Sear, the holder of a victualler's licence for the house and premises known as Hotel de France at Panton Hill, hereby give notice that it is my intention to apply to the licensing magistrate at Lilydale on the 18th of November 1904 to transfer the licence to Jessie Rochford. And it says in 1904 at Pambula, New South Wales, that Mr Rochford, the late licensee of the Royal Hotel, was entertained at a farewell prior to his departure for Victoria. In 1907 they were living at Buchan in Victoria, near Bairnsdale, and there was an advertisement for their hotel at Buchan. The Cricket Club Hotel, where the caves are, keeps Rochfords very comfortably and enables them to maintain a first-class table, best liquors and cigars, and to be civil and obliging between drinks. Good fishing and shooting. And it states on the 7th of May 1908, the licence of the Cricket Club Hotel in Buchan was transferred from Jessie Rochford to Jerome Sims at the Bairnsdale Licensing Court. In May 1931, George Rochford features in the Herald newspaper in Victoria, and it says earning money through the Depression years by carving animals from tree ferns, and the photo was taken at his home at Ferntree Gully Road in Montana, Victoria. In the Depression, George would set himself up in Collins Street outside the Baptist Church and sell garden novelties that he had carved. In 1938, they lived at Maysmore in Canterbury Road, Bayswater, Victoria, and then in about 1950 were living in Bass in South Gippsland. Jessie died on the 3rd of January 1954 at Wonthaggi Hospital after a long illness. Said she was a beloved wife of George W. of Bass and loving mother of Lawrence of Sydney, George deceased, Frank deceased, Charles of Dunkeld, Christopher of Geelong, Philip of Bass and Septimus of Trafalgar, and loving grandma of 21 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, aged 79.5 years, a good wife and mother at rest. So Jessie and George's children. Lawrence Everard George Rochford was born on the 15th of April 1899 at Cunningham, Victoria. He enlisted in the Royal Australian Navy when he was 19 for World War I as a petty officer on the HMAS Sydney. He married Maud Hines in Sydney in 1925 and they had 3 children, 2 that survived childhood. He was a die sinker, an engraver and an engineer, and he also enlisted in World War II. Maud died in March 1964 and Lawrence went on to marry Isabella Orchardson in Sydney in November 1964. Isabella was 10 years younger than Lawrence, and Isabella died in September 1966. And Lawrence, known as Laurie, died on the 1st of August 1981 at Coonabarabran, New South Wales. Their second child, George Washington Rochford Jr., was born on the 29th of June 1901 in Pambula, New South Wales. At the age of 18, in November 1919, he was a strapper for the winner of the Melbourne Cup, artilleryman. In 1937, he married Mary McKessick when he was 36 and Mary 34. They had 4 children and they owned a store in Ferntree Gully in 1938 before he became a truck driver. He enlisted in World War II in February 1944 and was discharged in October 1945. And George Jr. died on the 26th of December 1948 at Clydesdale, Victoria, aged only 47. The third child was Francis Alfred Rochford, who was born on the 30th of April 1903, but died on the 11th of May 1903 at Pambula, New South Wales. Their fourth child was Charles Thomas Rochford, who was born on the 16th of July 1904 in Pambula, New South Wales. He married Norma Harris and they had 5 children. He worked as a station hand in Mortlake, Victoria on Ennerdale Station from 1931 until he enlisted in World War II, where he served in the Middle East with two of his brothers, Chris and Phil, in 1942. On the 7th of March 1946, so there was an RSA farewell at Allendale. Mr. and Mrs. Rochford facilitated. A social evening was tended by Mr. and Mrs. C. Rochford and family in the Allendale Hall on Tuesday night by members of the Port McConnell sub-branch of the RSA and their wives on the eve of their departure for the Western District of Victoria. In 1949, he was manager at Bannangill at Skipton, Victoria, and by 1954 had their own farm at Dunkeld in Victoria. And Charles died on the 2nd of September 1967 in Hamilton, Victoria, aged 63. Their fifth child, Christopher Everard Rochford, was born on the 20th of May 1909 in Brunswick, Victoria. He married Annie Hall in Mildura in 1932 when he was 23 and Annie 15. They had 4 children with 3 surviving infancy, and he enlisted in World War II in 1942. In 1943, he was working as a groom at Annandale Station, where his brother was working at Mortlake. In 1949, he was working as a station hand at Buckley, and his wife died in 1951. In July 1953, he married Isabel McPadden in Geelong. In 1954, he worked as a carpenter in Geelong. He was a cabin proprietor on Bribie Island in Queensland at this time. He was living at Bribie Island in 1962. And by 1968, they were living at Booderham in Queensland, where he worked as a locksmith, and then in 1972 he became a grocer. Christopher died on the 27th of June 1980 in Toowoomba, Queensland, aged 71. The sixth child was Philip James King Rochford, who was born on the 18th of October 1911 in Prahran, Victoria. His birth certificate states his name as Philip James Rochford, but he was always known as Philip King Rochford. As a 15-year-old in 1926 in Beenack, Victoria, he walked 4 miles to the Beenack Mill, where he worked on a sawdust barrel for 9 months, and then moved on to the Powtown Mill. At 17, in 1928, he worked in Sassafras, Victoria, for W.L. Dale of Lorna Doone, doing concrete work. He married Barbara Oldcastle in Richmond in November 1931, when he was 20 and Barbara 17, and they had 4 children. In 1933, they lived in Croydon, and he did a relief job in the Depression years working at laying water pipes for Melbourne. In August 1934, they lived at Pura in Victoria, and then arrived at Terranellum Station as a labourer with his brother George, where they did odd jobs and rabbiting. They were also at Annandale Station, where his brother worked. Money was sent home to their families. On the 24th of April 1937, he was living in Ringwood, and then they moved to Maysmore in Canterbury Road, Bayswater, with his family. He worked as a PMG linesman at this time and also a carrier. He enlisted in World War II and was a signalman in the 9th Division, 2nd 12th Battalion, and was a Rat of Tobruk. He went to war on the Mauritania and came home on the Aquitania. In 1947, he was living with his family in Bass, South Gippsland, and then he purchased a soldier settlement property of 150 acres, and then later purchased a further 150 acres in 1959. In November 1959, they left Bass for Bribie Island to be nearer to his brother Chris, where he was a milk vendor and then the caretaker of Bongaree Caravan Park. He and Barbara divorced in October 1977, and he went on to marry Doreen Wright in Lismore, New South Wales in June 1978. In 1980, they lived in Richmond, New South Wales, and then moved to Queensland again. He died on the 21st of April 1999 at Kippa-Ring, Queensland, aged 87. And the youngest boy of the family, Septimus Everard Rochford, was born on the 6th of October 1913 in Cheltenham, Victoria. He married Agnes Dusha in Mildura in June 1936, and they had 3 girls. He also enlisted in the army and served in 1932 and 1933 and again in 1943. In 1949, he worked at the Rocklands Dam at Maui, Victoria. They lived at Trafalgar in Victoria, where he worked as a plant operator, and in the 1960s he was working for the State Electricity Commission and was caretaker of the Yallourn Hall. They moved back to Maui in 1980 in his retirement, and he died on the 6th of February 1982 in Maui, Victoria, aged 68. So in the end, Jessie seemed to have found the man that she spent the rest of her life with and whom she had a large family of boys with.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.